Toronto's new approach to homeless encampments unveiled in media conference. My name is Gabriel Meissner, and this is a report for rptv News. On May 22nd, Gordon Tanner, General Manager of Toronto Shelter and Support Services, and Councillor Alejandra Bravo, Davenport, Chair of the Economic and Community Development Committee, hosted a media conference unveiling a transformative shift in the city's strategy toward homeless encampments based on feedback from the public, interested parties, and recommendations from the city's Ombudsman. Encampments are a symptom of the housing affordability crisis, shelter demand that exceeds availability, and other social crises such as mental health and drug toxicity. This encampment staff report prioritizes transparency and coordination, centering on people's needs and dignity. The report will provide city staff a clear framework to connect individuals with indoor spaces while also addressing the concerns of surrounding communities. Toronto Shelter and Support Services, TSSS, staff will present the report to the Economic and Community Development Committee on May 29th. If passed by Council, it would mark a shift in the city's approach to encampments, from enforcement to outreach and support. rptv reporter Fred Alvarado was at City Hall to document the media conference. Stay tuned for highlights and insights from the event, unveiling the city's evolving approach to homeless encampments.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for being here. Last year, City Council declared homelessness an emergency in Toronto, and it's in that context that Economic and Community Development Committee will receive this report. Whether unhoused or housed, every resident deserves to be treated with dignity, and every resident has inherent rights that have to be respected. And this is really important to me. They are our constituents, whether they are housed or unhoused. Unfortunately, this wasn't the case in 2021 when the city's response to growing homelessness, of which encampments are a result, was met with clearings carried out with force instead of care. That approach violated people's rights and caused great harm to encampment residents and the people who supported them. This is according to the findings of the City of Toronto Ombudsman's office, and that office's responsibility is to make sure people are treated fairly. Across Canada, encampments are the result of a lack of affordable housing, increases in rents and cost of living, and inadequate social supports. A growing number of people in our city are struggling to find shelter and food and housing, and this is compounded by a lack of mental health care, which only makes people who are already vulnerable more vulnerable. The City of Toronto has committed to progressively realizing the right to housing, and therefore has an obligation to treat people living in encampments with compassion and care. While there's no easy solution, providing real pathways to shelter and housing works, and meeting people's needs has already shown some positive results in our city. I'm happy to see this report come forward. It details the significant shifts we are already making away from enforcement and clearing, which only moves people from one place to the next and does not work as an approach to encampments. While there's significant public pressure to remove encampments, especially from parks, safety is the condition for removal, and people need to know why and how it's going to happen. The city's updated approach and protocols to encampments is a crucial step in making good on our commitment to progressively realizing the right to housing as a human right, and it's a key response to the Ombudsman's report. Getting this work right involves deep and ongoing engagement with those living in or having lived in encampments, as well as the people who serve them and know their needs very well. Core to the approach is providing transparent and a coordinated process to guide city staff in their work, and that means exhausting tools to connect people to indoor spaces, providing enhanced and flexible service models to respond to people's needs, and safety and shelter, safety in the shelter system. Mayor Chow and I have written to Economic and Community Development Committee with a motion to direct city staff to develop and implement key actions to increase access to safe, secure housing and shelter for people who are living outdoors, and respond to the unique housing needs of shelter seekers. And I particularly want to highlight our recommendation for a pilot program of enhanced multi-sectoral case management, support for people living outdoors, those people who have complex mental and physical health needs, and that this work be done in partnership with community serving agencies and healthcare experts. And second, we are making the request of the Government of Ontario to immediately allocate $54 million to the City of Toronto for the Year 5 administration of the Canada-Ontario Housing Benefit Program to meet demand and continue to support transitions for people living outdoors and in our shelter system to permanent housing. This is a problem for governments across the country to face the crisis of people not having a home. And for Toronto, this is another step that builds on the shelter safety study, will include an assessment of needs this fall, followed by a shelter safety plan and the first shelter capital plan for the City of Toronto. It's an urgency, of course, that's joined by the commitment of this mayor and this council to build more affordable housing. And with that, I'll pass it on to Gord Tanner.
Well, thank you very much, Councillor Bravo, and good afternoon, and thank you all for joining us today to hear about how the City of Toronto is enhancing and evolving its approach to encampments and supports for those experiencing homelessness. Let me start by recognizing, the hard work and compassionate work that happens every day on the streets of this city by our outreach workers, healthcare workers, nurses, volunteers, folks that go into public spaces and connect with people who are living absolutely homeless and support them to get connected to the essential supports and help that they need. So as we at the City of Toronto work to connect those to housing that they deserve, the work of these folks is critical, and we thank them for that. Encampments are a symptom of the housing affordability crisis, shelter demand that exceeds availability, and other social challenges such as the mental health crisis and drug toxicity crisis. Toronto continues to see unprecedented pressure on an emergency shelter system due to inflated costs of living, insufficient affordable and rent-geared income housing, inadequate income supports, and an increase in the number of refugee claimants arriving in the city. We're working to address each of these issues, but in the meantime, we know people continue to be at risk. In April of this past month, we had an average every day of 225 people that called us at our central intake phone service that were unable to get matched to a bed by the end of the day. As of May 5th, there were 256 encampments at 131 city-owned properties in Toronto. But this work is about people. That's why we've evolved our strategic approach to encampments. Everyone deserves a safe, affordable place to call home. And this report and the accompanying protocols are just one piece of the measures we're taking to offer certainty, help, and dignity to people experiencing homelessness and surrounding communities. As the weather warms, we often see an increase in the number of encampments in the city, and that's true again this season. This report provides a timely and much-needed update on the work we are doing to help. The nature of these challenges are changing, and we need to be changing with them. We're presenting a housing-first, human rights-based approach to support people to access indoor spaces while also addressing the needs of the broader community. There are several key pillars to this approach. The first is expanding the enhanced, focused, housing-focused outreach and support model to other encampments. It's exploring new service models for people that are living outdoors. It's about enhancing safety in our shelter system, both for our staff and our clients. And finally, it must be about increasing housing opportunities and shelter system flow. We know great success comes from meeting people where they are at. The city has added an enhanced outreach model to its encampment toolkit that allows us to provide increased security, amenities, health services, and street outreach. We know this approach works. Dufferin Grove Park and Allen Gardens demonstrate that we can reduce encampments and help people transition to shelter and permanent housing. At Allen Gardens, as of May 17th, 97 people have moved from that park into housing with supports. Another 320 people have been referred into the shelter system. We are now down to about nine encampments from a high of 84 in July of last year. We've also moved our focus away from enforcement. We know there are better options. Instead, the city now takes an approach that involves outreach, collaboration, and exhausting available tools and options to assist people in encampments to move indoors. This report also provides an opportunity to report back on how we've been implementing recommendations received from Toronto's Ombudsman. Their final report, released in March of 2023, concluded that the city demonstrated unfairness in how it planned, engaged stakeholders, and communicated with the public about encampment clearings. We've taken that feedback to heart. We've accepted all 31 recommendations in 2 reports and have completed 28 and are working on the remainder. One relates to an update to enhance our shelter management information system, and the others involve continuing to repair community relationships and our ongoing quarterly updates to the Ombudsman Toronto's office. We're committed to continue to learn from what goes well and what doesn't, and we'll continue to consult with those experiencing homelessness, experts, partner organizations, and communities. And we thank them all for their thoughts and their feedback. These new practices are contained in our update to the interdivisional protocol for encampments in Toronto, or what we would call our IDP. The enhancements are thorough and they're thoughtful. They outline a clear and coordinated process to guide city staff in supporting people living at encampments. It sets out when a park should receive an enhanced outreach model, how best to connect people to indoor spaces, and circumstances where measured enforcement may be required. We could not accomplish this work alone. The IDP was informed by a comprehensive review of human rights materials related to encampments, consultations with community groups, advocates, and engagement with people with lived experience and service providers. It also included separate and distinct meetings with Indigenous leaders in Toronto and Indigenous people with lived experience. And we commit to maintain this document and review it to ensure it adapts to changing needs. The staff report on encampments, as Councillor Bravo indicated, will be presented to the Economic Community Development Committee on May the 29th. The reports are now available online for public viewing. Homelessness is a complex issue. It requires strong commitment from all orders of government, community agencies, stakeholders, and the general public to provide comprehensive health and social supports required to help people exit homelessness. The city's goal is to deliver that help, putting people first as we connect them to housing. We need our government partners to continue to meet with us at the table. And for example, as Councillor Bravo indicated, if we had certainty around Toronto's funding of the Canada-Ontario Housing Benefit today, we'd be moving 300 or more households out of the shelter system each month into permanent housing. We're committed to making homelessness rare, brief, and non-recurring, but it requires a team effort. And we'll continue to work closely with the provincial and federal governments to secure funding to care for refugees, expand our emergency shelter system, and find long-term solutions for supportive and affordable housing. Thank you.
We will now move into our media Q&A. If you can just state your name and your outlet as well as who you're directing your question to. We'll go with one question and follow up.
For Victoria Dixon, Toronto Star. Question for you about the consultation with cities with this new protocol. It included city staff saying that they felt that political pressure had created a sense of emergency to respond to non-emergency scenarios, and political interference played an undue role in enforcement decisions. Is that something that you experienced, and is there anything in this new protocol that will make sure that doesn't happen?
Thanks for the question, Victoria. I'd say, in my time within Toronto shelters, that wasn't my experience, but certainly, one can understand there was a significant amount of pressure in the summer of 2021 to support people who were living outdoors. I think later that year, we demonstrated that we can do it without enforcement at a place like Dufferin Grove Park, and that's the approach that we'll continue to deploy across the city.
And the same consultation report talked about people who were living outside, going to specific locations because they felt that if they attracted political attention, they would get housing supports. With this new protocol and a budget for only 3 prioritized locations per year, with more than 100 locations across the city today, is there any concern about a sense of unfairness and people feeling that they are being restricted from accessing support?
Again, thanks for the question. I mean, staff within the division and at the city make tough calls every day on prioritizing scarce resources for people in need. We do our best to, assist in matching those resources with the most vulnerable folks that live in our community, and some of those folks are folks that live at encampments. Many of the parks that I talked about may have one or two tents. We're very focused right now at larger encampments that are in public spaces that may be preventing others from accessing those spaces, so places like Allen Gardens or Clarence Square. And we'll continue to review, where people are living and do our best to bring our resources to them to support them however we can.
Can you talk about the pressure between the number of refugees that are coming to the city? Where are we at with that? What is the balance of refugees versus, the spaces and what's expected this summer? Are we going to see a repeat of what we saw at John Street and, the situation of so many people going to church basements and crises like this?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I'd say we are still very much in a crisis response to this issue. People continue to arrive, unfortunately, in an uncoordinated way in the GTHA communities without a place to initially contact and connect with services. We are moving every weekend, people from Peter Street to hotels operated by the federal government outside of Toronto. And probably have moved over 2,400 people since October out of the city to those services. Concurrently, we're sheltering about 6,400 refugee claimants in the city, both inside and outside the shelter system. That's about half of the total beds we have in operation. Our calls continue, although we welcome the support of the federal government in the recent budget to support some of the interim housing initiatives we have at play. What is desperately needed is a coordinated regional response to this issue and the establishment of a regional reception center, something that City Council has long asked for, as well as our community partners.
I'll just add that one of the recommendations from the Mayor and myself to Economic and Community Development Committee is that we establish a roundtable that brings together refugee-serving sector, the sector that serves asylum seekers, to look at how a response can be tailored. When refugees or asylum seekers receive their status, with some supports, they're quite likely to succeed. That's a case in my family's situation where I came as a refugee. And so if we can make sure that response is tailored to them, then we would relieve a lot of pressure on the rest of the system.
And then I just want to clarify, what is an encampment? What is a defined encampment? Is it one tent? Is it multiple people living in multiple tents? What is an encampment?
Yeah, so we classify one encampment as one temporary dwelling, one tent, one structure that might be in a public space. It might be occupied by more than one person, so we look at the number of structures, we look at the number of people, but this is very much a people-focused approach, so trying to match people that are at our public spaces with the services they need to be successful.
Dale and I are CBC Toronto. Council, you mentioned that there's a lot of public pressure to remove encampments, especially from public parks. At what point, what's the threshold now to clear an encampment?
Well, first of all, the IDP has come forward today, and the report has come forward today, so we'll be considering that at committee. But I think that what you've heard is that the approach here is not to start with enforcement and not even to prioritize enforcement. That in fact, we have to find the ways to get people into secure shelter and on the pathway to housing. So it is negotiating the different uses that we have in the public realm, but with the numbers of people we're turning away every day from our shelter system, because of the huge volume of people who are living unhoused right now, we all have to show some grace in this situation. And there was a mention of asylum seekers coming to Toronto, but we also know that people who live in Toronto, who are tenants, are at risk of being evicted and are becoming homeless every day in this city because of the lack of affordable housing. So I think we have to show a lot of grace, and it's certainly in my ward there are people who are living in tents, and the approach that's been taken that works is to visit them, find out their needs, and find the pathways inside.
And you
give an update on the situation at Clarence Square?
Yes, certainly. So Clarence Square is one of the sites where we've deployed this enhanced outreach model. That happened probably about a month ago now. We've had 2 people housed from that encampment. I believe we've had over 20 referrals into the shelter system. Staff are on the ground connecting with the individuals living there, and the work is going well. Developing housing plans might entail getting access to income, ID, and lining folks up with housing. So I'm happy with the way things are going at Clarence Square with our partners, and that work will continue. So 2 people have moved to permanent housing. Over 20 folks have been referred into the shelter system. We've deployed what we would call our encampment prevention plan to stop that encampment from growing. So any new person that comes to try and set up a tent there or a structure is supported to try and get into the shelter system, or we try and assist them with their needs as they arrive.
Madame Bravo, je lis Version Canada. Peut-être m'expliquer en français le coup de pression des résidents en ce moment pour un peu, comme on l'avait dit, pour nettoyer ces parcs-là. À quel moment est-ce qu'on va commencer à devoir nettoyer et démanteler le parc?
Les pressions sont expérimentées également par les personnes sans toit. Alors, on doit comprendre qu'il n'y a pas le nettoyage, ou c'est pas la priorité. C'est pas la façon d'aborder cette crise. Le manque de logements abordables et de la manque d'abri ici à la ville de Toronto, car il y a beaucoup de pression avec les arrivants d'ailleurs, mais aussi les personnes qui se trouvent sans un logement. Alors, on devra négocier. Les intérêts sont différents, mais toutes ces personnes sont des habitants de la ville de Toronto, les résidents. Alors, nous devons travailler pour eux. Et ce qu'on a, c'est une façon transparente et d'expliquer dans quelles conditions. Et les conditions sont la manque de santé et s'il y a un problème d'assurance à la personne, s'il y a par exemple les défis comme les conditions qui peuvent résulter dans un feu, par exemple. Ce sont les conditions pour actionner ce qui c'est dans le protocole.
I'm just going to jump in because I didn't get a follow-up. But what is the major difference between the original outreach model and this enhanced outreach model? So operationally, logistically, what are the key differences that Al regards to?
Yeah, so thanks for that question, Dill. So, this enhanced outreach model that we deployed, Dufferin Grove, Allen Gardens, Clarence Square now, requires that, first off, we're identifying local partners to work with the folks that are in that encampment. We've been deploying an actual office to the park, so a trailer that we deploy to the park that staff work out of 7 days a week. We bring in a variety of other supports, whether it's our community mental health supports, primary care supports, and others. There's a weekly schedule developed. And then concurrent with that, our case managers come in and develop housing plans and offer housing supports to the folks in the encampment. Concurrently as well, we do deploy community safety teams to these locations, coordinate with solid waste and parks, forestry and recreation, or whoever, to remove debris as it accumulates, make sure there are no drug paraphernalia or needles in the park. So it's really, I'd say, a blitz of community and social resources that come to a park, again, with the efforts to connect people to housing or immediate shelter.
Regent, so I just want to clarify, it says here you're expanding this outreach model. Does that mean that it's like the de facto model for all the encampments, or are there still some situations where you're taking a different approach?
If you're referring to the recommendation that the mayor and I are making to Economic and Community Development Committee, within the resources that exist, as you know, in the city, the budget is set in it really requires the development of a pilot program to look at how we can meet the unique needs of people that are most in need. This entire approach is meeting people where they are, whatever their vulnerabilities, and really experimenting with what it would mean to have a caseworker assigned to someone who may be in an encampment one day, but may go into the shelter system a different day. And then connecting them on the healthcare side with what they need in relationship to whether it's physical health or mental health. That casework approach is something that requires resources, and we would like to understand how successful it can be when we have someone accompanying someone alongside to make sure they're getting to appointments, they're getting the help they need. And so we can report on that. We can hear the report from staff in time for the budget process. It's clearly, the scale of the challenge and the need does require resources, and in a resource-constrained city, we're talking about prioritizing this approach.
And just to jump off the top of what other people have, does that mean there's also no situation at this point where you would go for an enforcement, like a clearing approach?
I think you've seen under this administration, and certainly since a big difference since 2021 in those clearings, the clearings it's not a strategy that works. It removes people from one place and to go where? There's nowhere to go inside. This approach is actually finding pathways into shelter, and that can eventually lead to stable housing. So putting the resources where they can really make a difference, not harming people who are already vulnerable. And so I think that's what we're looking at. There are situations where there's a safety concern, either for individuals who are in encampments, for example, because of fire, where the protocol may require that a notice is for removal, but that's laid out now. What wasn't accountable before, and when I started as a counselor, it wasn't clear who decides, how it's decided, what are the steps that people are going to experience. How can we be transparent and accountable to the people who are in encampments and the people who are supporting them? And I think that's a big difference. We want to be in a situation where we don't have anybody having to live outdoors, where we don't have people living in encampments, and we want to get to a place where this conversation will be irrelevant. We are building the scaffolds to get there with the shelter capital plan and with the building affordable housing. What we need now is all of government, federal and provincial government, to get on board.
Last question?
But to that point, Laura, maybe you can answer this. The policy does contemplate the potential need for enforcement, and it provides a window. It says that it will give people in encampment 72 hours notice of enforcement. What would trigger that? I mean, is it just a safety issue, or are there other circumstances in which you can envision enforcement being?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, listen, every encampment is a little bit different in terms of the people who might live there or be staying there and the unique factors around them. So I think the councillors identified there could be immediate health and safety risks that may require us to move quickly and assist people to move elsewhere for their own protection. In other cases, this is really about the right to housing, and so we want to see people move into housing over a time period. If there are people who are not engaging with our teams and are not following through to assist, it's our opportunity to connect with other health professionals to really exhaust our toolkit, if you will. But ultimately, if folks, there's not a right to live in a park or in a public space, and our expectation is folks are working with us, or we're bringing them the supports that they need to connect with to make that move into housing.
Councillor Bravo, to that end, is there a scenario in which you would envision enforcement being frankly the last course of action?
I think that I've already said that if there's an immediate threat to a person or to people around them, that there would be a situation where I can see some kind of enforcement being necessary. My personal position, which is that doing a clearing doesn't work. and that we have to figure out alternatives. We have to build out the choices. There's an increasing amount of interest across Canada on what it means to be in the public realm and in parks, but I think the public service is guided by the bylaws in the City of Toronto. And this is some very unsettled area, and there are a lot of different views. If you asked every councillor, there'd be a different view around this. We have to work together as a council to build the conditions so that we don't even have to have this conversation, and that's my priority.
Thanks very much, everybody. Thanks very much. If you guys have follow-up questions, you can let me know or email media relations team to get back to you.
Just because you're here and you called this here.
Quickly, Matt, yeah.
Because you mentioned the budget constraints. Is this the best that you think the city can do to actually move the needle, or is this the best you can do within those fiscal restraints that you're dealt with?
That's a big question, because the fiscal constraints really started in the 90s when the federal government got out of building affordable housing. They continued when the provincial government downloaded social services to municipalities in Ontario. So the fiscal constraints are massive. Within the City of Toronto budget, which required this year a significant property tax increase, there have been investments made to provide shelter and to meet people's needs where they are. Do I think that we need more? Certainly, but that requires partnership also from the federal and provincial governments, and that we are transitioning into an approach to shelter in the shelter capital plan that sees shelters that are smaller, more purpose-built, tailored, and with programs that support people in their needs. And that actually creates pathways into stable housing. So do we need to review this during the budget process? I certainly think that that will be an element of this upcoming budget. But to be able to say, let's, for example, invest in a case management approach, we're trying it first. We're seeing whether it succeeds, and that I think that's the required very thoughtful stewarding of public resources is to lean into things that are really effective.
Thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Also follow us on social media, and for more information, check out our website.